I'm so used to like sharing and talking about my writing these days, but I still get so like, whenever I have to like share these like really interesting first drafts. Okay, so we're gonna be doing an edit with me video today. So we're actually gonna be looking at a scene that is the first draft of a prologue of the YA fantasy book that I wrote last year, which is nicknamed Project Moon. Usually for these videos, what I have done in the past is I like take old writing from usually like 2 to 4 years ago. But today, I think it would be interesting to look at a scene in the context of a larger story, and specifically as a prologue for a fantasy, because I haven't done that yet. We haven't looked at fantasy yet. We haven't looked at anything other than like really old short stories. Before we dive in, actually, I do want to just talk a little bit about my mindset on sharing my writing online. I think a lot of writers are apprehensive about sharing anything publicly, which I understand. It's good practice to, protect your work. I'll never share something that's not a first draft, or something that's from a current version of a manuscript, or if it's something that I think I'm so in love with, I usually will not share that. So if you're wondering like, why are you literally showing us something from a manuscript that you wrote last year? It's because this scene is no longer in the current version of the manuscript. I do not mind sharing this with you. It's not like the best writing ever, but not everything we write comes out perfect, and that's kind of like the point of this video. So yeah, I don't mind using some of my less polished writing as a learning opportunity. We can all look at it together. And the main reason that I really wanted to make this video, show you something that I wrote literally only last year, is because I think it's important to demystify the writing experience. If you're feeling frustrated about how bad your first drafts are, I'm about to show you that you are not alone. So yeah, what we're going to be looking at today is a first draft of this scene versus a revised, line edited draft. The second scene we're gonna look at is the same scene after pretty much one round of line edits. Like maybe I combed through it twice. I believe, I don't know, it's been a year now. This prologue has been written like 10 times already, so I don't even remember all the different versions, but this is like basically the first version. The main reason I cut the scene is because I just felt for a young adult fantasy prologue that it was a bit too reflective. You'll see what I mean when we get into it. I realized later that I wanted kind of like that opening note of the scene to be like less internal and more driven by external conflict and action. So that's why this scene is like not in the book at all anymore. I don't regret writing it though, because I think as a writer, I needed to like write this in order to understand like where the main character's headspace was at this point in the story. So it was one of those scenes that you kind of just write for yourself to understand the character. So because this is part of a larger story, I'm also just gonna give some necessary context. The main character's name is Kyra. This prologue happens 3 years before the events of the main story. And at this point in time, she has just returned home, like to her home country, after spending like 7 years living abroad. However, in this prologue, she, for mysterious reasons that we are not privy to yet, she's returned home 3 years early. So she's not supposed to come home yet, but she has. That's really all you need to know in terms of context. After this scene, chapter 1 starts on a time skip, and you learn the context of what like truly happened while she was in the Empire, like as the first act unravels. Okay, yeah. Anyway, thank you for listening to this long preamble. We shall look at the scene now. I've just gone through in advance and I've made comments, and I'm gonna like talk through some of those. Kyra had come home early, and so the whispers started. They tracked her across the temple grounds, stirred every room she entered. She pretended not to notice and kept away from the others. She passed the white-hot days in the shade of the gazebos along the shores of the beach. If she wandered far enough, she could even see the trading port in the distance. Ships docked in the harbor, their masts tangled on the horizon. Okay, so honestly, I'm so used to like sharing and talking about my writing these days, but I still get so like whenever I have to like share these like really interesting first drafts. Okay, so the first comment I actually made here was rhythm. I think sonically I just didn't like the sound of these sentences together. It tracked her across the temple grounds, stirred every room she entered. She pretended not to notice and kept away from the others. She passed the white hot days in the shade of the gazebos along the shores of the beach. So rhythmically, I think these collection of sentences together are very similar, which creates that sort of like repetitive feeling to it. On a particularly muggy afternoon with a headache pulsing in her temples, she lay down on her back, eyes closed, blocking the sun out with a frayed novel she plucked from the library. The breeze knocked the wind chimes above her. Okay, headache pulsing in her temples. Yes, this is familiar. This is familiar phrasing, I think, which is fine, but you know, if this is gonna be the very first scene that like your readers are gonna read, maybe not the best choice. She lay down on her back, eyes closed. This is fine. It's just, yeah, this is a bit boring and I don't know if it's necessary. There's no description of like where she is right now. Did I describe where she is right now? I don't think so. Yeah, okay, so at this point in time, Kyra's like, she's like in a gazebo and she's just like laying down on like the bench of this gazebo, but yeah, that hasn't been described yet, so it's like unclear where she's even laying down. Yeah, there's like actually some continuity errors in this. What is going on? Okay, the blocking the sun out with a frayed novel she plucked from the library. Is this detail important? If it's not going to come up again, if it's not an important motif, then do we need it? Like, it's fine just to have a detail for the sake of a detail, but I also just think that this isn't really doing anything. The breeze knocked the wind chimes above her. I actually did like this. You know you can't hide forever. Kyra lifted her book. It was Althea, of course. She had grown so much in 7 years. When they were children, she'd been smaller than Kyra. Now she looked slender and elegant in a white linen dress. It swayed at her ankles as she marched up the steps towards her. What I said here about this dialogue. Now, my dialogue in my first drafts always sounds like freaking ridiculous. Dialogue should always, you know, reveal us like the character's personality and dynamic, the two people that are talking. For context, Kyra and Althea are childhood friends. They haven't seen each other in 7 years because Kyra has been living away. And I just think of like, if this is childhood friends that are talking to each other, I don't know, I just feel like that should be conveyed a little bit more. Also, you know you can't hide forever is familiar phrasing, and I just think it sounds really, really serious. You know, there should be more of like a playfulness, a familiarity between them. Maybe even some, you know, tension or awkwardness should also kind of come through beneath the surface because they haven't seen each other in that long. So I think, you know, peeling back all those layers of that relationship is important for every single exchange of dialogue that you have in your stories. The other thing about Althea's character is that I think when I was writing this scene, because it's one of the first scenes that I wrote, I didn't really have a grasp on like Thea as a character. She's supposed to be a lighthearted person. She's supposed to be playful. She's kind of innocent. I just don't think that she would come across sounding this direct and solemn. It's really not in her personality. She's supposed to kind of be like almost opposite to Kyra in every single way. Kyra is like very serious and cocky and cynical. Althea is like the direct opposite of all of that. Well, Kyra shut her book closed, resigned. If it was going to be anyone, it would be you. Ramila is looking for you, Althea said. I can't cover for you this time. Kyra slid across the bamboo bench and hopped out of the gazebo. It was rainy season on the Isles now. The clouds were hanging dark above them. Is it true? Althea asked as they crossed the narrow, rickety bridge back to the temple grounds, its wooden planks pliant in the moist air. Her voice was low, dipping with intrigue. That you were sent back by the Empire. Okay, so I highlighted this part here, is it true? Because this is a, like, it's supposed to feel like this turning point in the scene a little bit. And I think it comes in a little bit too suddenly here. It should feel through context and implication. Althea asking this question is a big deal. It should be clear that she's apprehensive about asking this question because it's kind of like this elephant in the room that no one is talking about. That's how this is supposed to come across. I don't think it does come across that way, but like this is where all of the tension is supposed to collect, you know? So her voice was low, dipping with intrigue. This is a show don't tell thing, so rephrase that for sure. The temple was surrounded by tall, slim palm trees, their leaves fanning out against the sky. On the grass, a small group of children were gathered excitedly around a mage who was preparing a snack for them, sliced avocados dressed with milk and sugar. Here they're walking back from like the beach into the temple grounds, and Kyra is observing her surroundings, right? I think this is a good opportunity here for Kyra to for us to really get more into Kyra's head. Like, why is she noticing these things at this point in time? I think there's like room here for some deeper internal character exploration. Even if it's just like an extra paragraph or an extra phrase or two that allows us to like get into her head a little bit more. Like, what is she thinking as she's looking at her old home that she hasn't seen in all these years, right? Kyra took a deep breath. The breeze was humid and heavy, lingering on her skin on the roof of her mouth. Yeah, she said. Even the words of her native tongue had started to feel clumsy, stilted from lack of use. There was an incident. Okay. In the draft of this book, I think yeah is used only like once or twice. It does feel kind of out of place. Althea turned around. What did you do? Kyra hesitated and pushed her hair out of her eyes. It had gotten long, longer than she was allowed to wear it technically, though it had been days and it seemed no one would chastise her for it. Her years away had made her a stranger here. Again, I think Althea is being very direct here, which is just not in her personality. This is another example of like a world building detail that I don't think is particularly necessary or impactful. I understand here that I was trying to mix world building with the overarching theme of the scene, which is, you know, feeling like a stranger in your homeland, in order to explore theme through the context of the world, if that makes sense. But it's just not a very strong, this is just not a very strong line, I don't think. Although her years away had made her a stranger here, it's fine to say it like this. But I don't think it is as impactful when it is outright stated, because again, this is supposed to be the thematic pillar of the scene. I think that feeling should permeate the scene in multiple ways. The other mages treaded lightly around her, even Althea, her oldest friend. Okay, yeah, this is a show don't tell thing. This can be implied through so many other context clues. You don't need to say it like that. They stopped at the entrance of the main hall. Sorry, I didn't mean to. You don't have to answer that, Althea said softly. Okay, this is a little more in line with her character, I think. Ramila told me not to ask. She was curious like everyone else, but doing a better job trying to hide it. Okay, yeah, this is a show don't tell again. You don't need to outright state this if in the dialogue above, the tension of their exchange and the tension of that question is implied. They stood in silence for a moment, then Althea smiled. You have an accent, you know, a little. She said it as if she were commenting on something inane, like a new article of clothing. Oh, Kyra tested the shape of the words in her mouth. I guess I do. She couldn't tell anymore. Okay, yeah, I like this. I think I kept it in the second draft. This is one of the very first scenes I ever wrote for the book, if not the first scene. So yeah, you can see how like messy it is. With all of that said, we will go into the revised draft. Okay, let's take a look at this. Version 2 of the scene seems like it's significantly longer. Okay, so right off the bat, changed the opening sentence actually. So, Kyra returned home a foreigner. I changed this because I liked the contrast of the word home and foreigner in one sentence. The other huge difference here is in version 1, we talk about how the whispers started and how, you know, everyone has all this chatter, while the first draft emphasizes how other people are seeing her. In this edit, the emphasis is more on how she sees herself. It was not the aisles that had changed, of course. In her memory, home was an old painting nestled deep into the cracks of the canvas, and she had arrived as wet and unsettled as fresh ink. In her ship-made port, she had gone straight to the temples. She was not ready to face her mother, the things she would say, and worse, the things she would not. In the temples, at least, it was quite easy to disappear within its walls and vast grounds. The beaches were familiar too. The sight of the ocean never changed after all, no matter which side of it she was on. So I think I had expanded and, added this in because I wanted to kind of use this opening to highlight Kyra's sense of displacement, because I don't think that idea is coming through enough in the first version of the scene. As I mentioned, the thematic pillar of the scene should be all of these complicated feelings that Kyra has towards her home and feeling like she is a stranger in a place that is supposed to be home. Overall, I think what I was trying to do here was just really steep the narrative much more into her thoughts, into her psyche and her insecurities. On the third day of her return, she ventured far enough along the shores that she could see the trading port in the distance. The ships docked in the harbor, their masts tangled on the horizon like the wings of giant birds. She watched the sails flutter so long she wondered if the ships would take flight right then. Okay, so we are returning to the ship imagery. So again, it looks like I expanded on this. Yeah, okay. So birds and flight, that's common imagery that you see a lot to represent freedom, to represent, escaping from a situation that you don't want to be in. It seems like I added it in just to really drive that point home for Kyra. I think the ship imagery alone, I think it's fine because I think ships also represent that feeling, but I do feel like this strengthens it a little bit more. She wondered why the thought consumed her so much. After all, there was nothing waiting for her beyond those waters now. She had left the Empire knowing she had burned everything down behind her, knowing she would do it again if she had the chance. Okay, this is another really important idea that we are adding into this prologue that was not in the original. So belonging is something that I think is like integral to Kyra's internal conflict, something that she really has to work throughout the story. And we see that she's just returned home, she's feeling out of place, she's harboring some guilt towards something that we don't know the details of yet. So the emphasis on that guilt is really important. I think that's another reason that this first draft is really lacking. And in first drafts you're always just trying to figure shit out. I think I had gone back to line edit this scene after I had written the first chapter, so I had a better idea of who Kyra's character kind of was and what she was struggling with. The other important idea here is the knowing she would do it again if she had the chance. It highlights the fact that for Kyra, the prevailing sentiment that she feels towards whatever the frick happened, it's not regret, it's more resignation, perhaps. So that offers a lot of insight into what kind of person she is. Found you. There was only so far Kyra could run. The isles were too small if you weren't willing to jump into the ocean. She figured someone would catch up to her eventually. It didn't surprise her that it was Althea. So if you remember, the original line is, you can't hide forever. Yeah, okay, I like this change. So I think this versus this original line, it's not as chastising, It's a little bit more playful, and I don't think it really is in Althea's personality to chastise. Kyra cracked an eye open. She had fallen asleep in the cool shade of the gazebo. The breeze knocked the wind chimes above her. Okay, so we fixed that continuity error where we didn't describe where Kyra was. So that's good. And again, I just kind of cut some of the excess detail that I felt like was lackluster and not really doing anything. Like this paragraph here. Althea gave her a look. A shared realization passed between them, seeing how much a person could change in 7 years and simultaneously stay the exact same. Comparing the dialogue of this versus whatever was going on in this other scene. Yeah, in this rework, I was definitely going for something that implies a little bit more familiarity, warm nostalgia and history between that kind of dynamic. These two should feel like they're friends, even if a lot of time has passed between them. Althea is not a huge character in this story at all. She really isn't even fully a character. She really is someone that is just supposed to represent and embody Kyra's past. In this moment, Althea to Kyra feels both familiar and different. So for Kyra, it's like, you know, seeing a glimpse of the past that you once knew, but it's not entirely the same. Positive feelings, but she's also feeling quite unsettled. Althea had all the sweetness and wide-eyed beauty Kyra recalled from their childhood, but she had been smaller than Kyra then. Now she had grown into herself, tall and elegant in her white linen dress. Her long skirt swayed like shifting sunlight as she marched up the steps towards her. So here, just adding more details about Althea, you know, characterizing her a little bit more. We didn't really get that in this first draft. Ramila is looking for you, said Althea, as if Kyra did not know that. She could have asked Althea to lie for her. When they were children, Kyra could ask Althea to do anything, but they were not children anymore. This adds a new layer to their dynamic, and it also sheds some light on Kyra's character as well. A huge part of Kyra's character, actually, which is not really supposed to be that important for this very first scene, but it is part of her arc. In her past, Kyra had a certain cockiness to her. You know, she grew up believing that she could do anything. Perhaps she felt like she had a certain power in that. And so this line, I think what I was trying to do here was to sort of imply a kind of like, you know, maybe a slight power dynamic that they had as children. Of course, she sighed and slid across the bamboo bench. She followed Althea out of the gazebo. It was rainy season on the Isles now. The clouds were hanging dark above them. They walked so closely their arms brushed, yet Kyra felt as though the entire ocean was still between them. At last, Althea broke the silence. Is it true? So now we finally get the is it true? Really, if you were to look at this exchange in this version versus here, the only real difference between these two is this extra line. But even though it's just one extra line, I think it adds that extra weight that you need. These two lines here, I think, immediately punctuate this question a little bit more. They crossed the narrow rickety bridge back to the temple grounds, its wooden planks pliant in the moist air. Her voice dipped as if she feared the wind had ears and would carry her words straight to Ramila. It pretty much does the same thing as this, except we don't have to say dipping with intrigue. Which part? Said Kyra. By now she had lost track of each rumor. This response just feels much more evasive. The central temple was surrounded by slim palm trees, their leaves drooping against the hot sky. This is mostly the same as the original scene, or paragraph, I mean. I did cut out tall. I think when you think of trees, they are implicitly tall. So I don't think we need to say that. Their leaves drooping. Okay, what did I say here? Right, I think I chose drooping over fanning. I think I really wanted the atmosphere to feel much more lethargic. I think if I were to rework this again, I would try to find a stronger verb than gathered excitedly. This was home, Kyra reminded herself, as if she were relearning the names of colors or the letters of the alphabet. Home, the clamor of the temples, the biting sun and salty breeze, and mages praying by the sea. It was sipping sweet juice in midday heat, mosquitoes nipping her bare legs, fingers pineapple sticky. As I said, with this scene, why is Kyra observing these details at this moment? What is going through her head as she's observing these details? Adding in this one little paragraph helps to contextualize her inner thoughts a little bit more. Kyra has such a complicated relationship with her past, and she associates her most, positive memories of home with her childhood, with those years before she had been sent to live away. Here, it almost feels like she's talking about herself, like she's talking about a child. She's observing the temple grounds, this place that she grew up in. I wanted it to feel like she was truly forcing herself to be like, I am supposed to like it here. She's like taking inventory of all these really minute details. And I also think it just adds a lot more build up and tension before she finally answers Althea's question. There was an incident, replied Kyra. It must have been quite the incident if Ramila won't even let you talk about it, though I would expect no less from you, of course. Althea was teasing now. Did you cause some ruckus in the imperial palace, destroy an entire peace treaty with the crown? Kyra wiped the sweat from her brow. The heat of the aisles was something she loved as a child. Now it just made her feverish and faint. Something like that, she muttered. Again, I like this dialogue better. I think it does feel more evasive. Kyra not wanting to talk about it. You have an accent now, a little. Althea said it as if she were commenting on something inane, like a new article of clothing. Kyra's stomach flipped. Do I? She tested the shape of the sounds in her mouth. She couldn't tell anymore. This was the most she had spoken of her native tongue in almost a decade. Do I? She said, a bit horrified. Okay, yeah, this is an interesting detail. In the first draft, I don't think it was clear how much this comment about Kyra having an accent now. I don't think it was clear that this actually bothers her a lot, that Kyra feels like a foreigner in her home. That is what is going through her head this entire scene. And then now, not only is she feeling that, but someone else is pointing it out to her. I'd like to see the Empire one day, when the war is over, of course. I hear the palace grounds are bigger even than our temples. It must have been lovely. Did you ever see the Crown Prince when you studied there? Asked Althea, eyes alight. Is he as handsome as they say? Feet kicked up stones in the gravel. Thunder cracked behind the clouds. Soon a storm would break the skies open. Kyra stopped them at the entrance of the main hall, dreading her audience with Ramila. Soon a storm would break the skies open. Yeah, storm brewing. Common imagery, I would say. This is definitely a trope, for like, that's supposed to, symbolism of like building tension and stuff like that. But I feel like it fit, I liked it, I kept it in. I think this is like one of the easiest ways to kind of like build attention on two planes, right? Like the foreground and the background. Yes, it is common imagery. It might feel a little bit like familiar phrasing. I liked it, so I kept it. So Althea asks, is he as handsome as they say? No, she said. No, you didn't see him, or no, he isn't handsome. So this is a whole exchange, a whole new exchange that I added into this scene. I think what I was really trying to do here was further establish the difference in the personalities between Kyra and Althea. So the prince character, he is a main character in the book. There are 4 narrators and he is one of them. I'm trying to remember what I did here. I think I just liked the idea of Althea being the first person to mention him, the first person to bring him up. This is our first introduction into him. And so I think it's very telling of how the public views him, of, what his reputation is. That we would have Althea bring him up in such an excited and playful way. Like, that is going to be sort of what our image of his character is. Kyra stood in the warmth of Althea's smile and found, like old times, that she did not quite have it in herself to lie to her oldest friend. I saw him, said Kyra. The cold stone beneath her feet crept up through her sandals. You would have liked him. He would have liked you. Not for the first time, Kyra wished her duty had belonged to Althea all along. They all would have been better for it. So Kyra and Tion is the prince that we haven't met yet. They have a very complicated dynamic. Of course, we don't know that yet, but we are trying to hint at it. We're trying to imply it. I think it hints at a lot of questions about like what the heck went down in the Empire. The other phrase I highlighted here, so this is supposed to imply Kyra's, sense of discomfort. I find that this is a little bit more effective than just describing, oh, her eyes started to shift, or she looked away, or her heart raced, or she flushed, because I could have gone with that too, and it would have conveyed the same emotion. But because this is Kyra's perspective, right? I don't think that she is the type of character who would notice herself flushing or notice her own heart rate going up, It's like a small change, but I think it does make a difference for Kyra's character. Isn't someone who's like very in tune even with her own emotions. Althea laughed, her honey warm eyes turning to perfect crescents. It really is good to have you back, For that moment, Kyra believed her. Then it was the end of the rainy season of her 15th year, and the war beyond their shores washed in with the tide. This is a very different ending note than what we got here. It's a very like internal reflective note. Here, I felt that it was important to end the scene on something a bit more concrete, expands the world a bit, because when chapter 1 starts, we are immediately like thrust into the current events and the action. I kind of wanted to create like a smoother transition into that external conflict and also provide a little hint at what happened in the 3-year time scale. Obviously, it's a much longer scene, but I was trying to really work through and expand on some of the themes and important aspects of Kyra's character that I really need to nail down. Like I said, this scene is no longer in the book. I cut it out because I felt like it's fine. Like, I think writing this scene really helped me get into Kyra's head. However, you know how like YA really likes dropping readers into like action, you know? There were a lot of other facets of the story that I wanted to explore as the opening scene of this book. So yeah, that's the scene. I hope it was helpful or interesting to go through it, to talk through my thoughts on it. Thank you as always for watching this video. Let me know if you guys want to see more Edit With Me videos. And yeah, that is all. I will see you guys in the next video, and I hope all of your writing projects are going well.